Engines drone, a metronome over a hungry city. Children line the wire in patched coats, ration cards folded like passports in small fists. They don't beg, they watch. Every 3 minutes, a 4-engine transport ghosts over the rooftops, wheels down, flaps humming, and disappears behind the terminal like a promise held tight. A pilot steps to the wire, the grit in his hair as gray as the afternoon. He kneels, meets their eyes, asks a question that is not about food. 2 sticks of gum come out of a pocket, split again and again until there are only sweet slivers and a fistful of thin wrappers. The first taste melts. The rest share the scent, closing their eyes to stretch it. Scarcity writes etiquette here. Even kindness is rationed. He hesitates. The rule is simple. Land, unload, out. Precision keeps people alive. He lowers his voice anyway. Watch for me tomorrow, he says. I'll wiggle my wings. Not a flourish, just a tells-only signal. A small defiance tucked inside the most disciplined timetable in the world. Heads nod along the fence, solemn as sentries accepting orders. Outside the frame, the math is brutal. In 1948, a blockade clamped shut every road and rail into West Berlin. Air was the narrow door, and it worked only because doctrine ruled everything. Radio ranges, timed separations, go-arounds without argument. One delay rippled for hours. One indulgence could break the chain. This is not a Hollywood rescue. It is logistics with margins stripped to bone. And yet here, at the wire, improvisation breathes. 2 strips of gum become a ceremony. The smallest abundance, measured in scent and rumor, expands until it occupies the space propaganda was meant to fill. Myth says candy falls and a city is saved. Reality is grimmer and also more interesting. Morale moves freight that numbers alone cannot. Could a pocket act of compassion become a strategic asset? The twist is quiet. The daring here is not a barrel roll over a hostile checkpoint. It is a wingtips shrug on final, and something small drifting where no schedule allows surprises. He is not authorized. He is not reckless. He is balancing on the line between order and mercy, trusting that the machine will hold if he gives it one unplanned gesture. Engines rise and fall. Coal smears the walls that close in alley shadows. On the far side of the wire, the children test the crinkle of empty wrappers and laugh without asking for more. At his bunk, the pilot studies approach plates and wind, rehearsing a promise he is not supposed to keep. Tomorrow, when the city looks up, the first answer will come on a pair of waggling wings. The risk isn't only personal. A broken interval means a go-around, and a go-around means fuel burned and a slot lost to someone carrying coal. Command could stamp this out in a memo, or it could see leverage in a smile. The memo that could have shut down a wing waggle had a larger problem to solve. On 24 June 1948, the Soviets closed the roads, rails, and canals into West Berlin, gambling that hunger and darkness would force the city to yield. An earlier Allied agreement left 3 corridors in the air, each 20 miles wide, threading from occupied Germany to the island of the western sectors. They were narrow lanes in a crowded sky, and they were all that remained. Math set the terms. Food, fuel, medicine, and mail had to flow by air, in weather that turned vicious without notice. Early estimates put the city's minimum at several thousand tons per day. Coal alone would push that higher as winter approached. The Allies flew anyway. The U.S. called it Operation Vittles, the British Operation Plainfare. RAF Dakotas and Yorks lifted in, as did U.S. C-47s, and soon the C-54 Skymaster became the backbone when winds allowed. Corridors were not highways, they were one-way agreements in practice. To keep aircraft from tangling over the city, inbound legs used the northern and southern lanes, and outbound traffic flowed west through the central corridor. Altitudes were stepped, arrivals spaced, and there was no circling stack over Berlin. If a crew missed an approach, it climbed and diverted back to West Germany rather than try again. Precision was not a preference, it was the condition of survival. The man who turned a scramble into a system had done it before. Major General William H. Tunner came in with a planner's patience and a freighter's ruthlessness about time. He banned heroics. He put aircraft on fixed intervals, every few minutes, round the clock, and forbade holding over Berlin. A missed approach meant an immediate go-around and a return along the outbound lane. Ground crews shaved minutes with standard loads and practiced unloads. Coffee stayed hot. Checklists stayed sacred. Berliners lived inside the margins of that schedule. Rations hovered near 1,400 calories, heavy on potatoes, dried vegetables, powdered milk, and whatever gardens could yield. Coal shortages meant cold flats and quiet radiators, even in neighborhoods already stripped for kindling. The lights did not always fail, but the fear that they might shaped habits. People learned the timetable of engines and measured hope in minutes, counting the gap between flights like breaths. The machine worked because it was impersonal. Crews flew by instruments in sleet and fog, trusted ground-controlled approach operators they never met, and accepted that a story about a near miss was a failure, not a badge. The targets rose as the system proved itself, 5,000 tons a day, then more, until spring demonstrations touched 5 figures in a single 24 hours. Coal, flour, medicine, newsprint, the list filled manifests the way rain fills gutters. Inside that impersonal rhythm moved a very human pilot. First Lieutenant Gale S. Halverson was a rule follower by instinct and training, a transport flyer who liked checklists and tidy margins. He flew the southern corridor out of Rhein-Main to Tempelhof in a Skymaster, settled into the ritual of approach plates and crosswinds, and the peculiar downdraft off Berlin's buildings. He carried a small 16mm camera and filmed the city from his window, the river, the cranes, and the cratered lots near the fence. He noticed what the camera could not fix, the way children held themselves straight at the wire, the way adults refused to crowd, the way a ration card softened at the fold like fabric. Abundance for him was a memory written in mess hall coffee and stateside candy bars. Scarcity was the smell on the air when coal burned low. Doctrine kept his world together. Improvisation lived on the other side of the fence, where dignity and hunger negotiated every hour. Here's the quiet twist. The same general who punished stunts would later protect a small breach because it served the mission. But Halverson did not know that yet. He knew the schedule, the fuel numbers, the feel of a heavy tail in crosswind, and the rule that nothing should disturb the flow. He also knew 2 sticks of gum were in his pocket. On a free afternoon between turns, he walked toward the fence to meet the city he had been flying over. His days settled into a loop. Pre-flight at Rhein-Main, a climb to an assigned altitude, the eastbound lane, descent through haze, a GCA voice in his ear, the slam of wheels on Tempelhof concrete, pallets off, and a quick cup of toffee before the westbound corridor carried him out. On a clipboard, the schedule looked clean. In a ration ledger he glimpsed at the field office, the columns were thin. He filmed to remember. He had no plan to alter doctrine. The next promise would begin with the signal "no manual mentioned anywhere." He keeps the promise. Halverson walks back to the fence, cap pushed back, a few sticks of gum in his pocket, and the city's eyes on him. Children separate from the wire as if at roll call. They stand at attention, ration cards hidden like contraband dignity. He asks how they are. A boy answers for the group, "Don't give up on us." A girl repeats it, as if translating courage. He splits the gum into slivers and passes them through. Wrappers get handed farther back, the smell shared like a hymn. Scarcity has rules. They obey them without complaint. He draws with his finger in the dirt. Runway, buildings, the path his aircraft will take. "Watch for the wings," he says. 2 little waggles, that will be me. Back in quarters, he turns the plan over in his hands like a contraband tool. Doctrine says no surprises on final. Discipline makes the machine work. He pulls 3 handkerchiefs from a kit bag and ties string to the corners, testing how they billow when he snaps his wrist. He wraps the last of his candy and gum into small bundles, feels their weight, and imagines the drift in crosswind. It will take seconds. It could cost a slot. Dawn brings haze and a light tailwind in the corridor. The Skymaster climbs to its assigned altitude and holds the eastbound line as if following rails in the sky. At Tempelhof, there is no stack. There is only timing. He copies the approach and review speeds, checks fuel and alternate, runs the checklist aloud. Precision is habit. Improvisation rides shotgun, quiet and unwelcome, but present. The city rises under the nose, canals, cranes, cracked lots, and the gray ribbon of concrete that matters more than any street. GCA takes him down the glide path, needles steady, calm hands on throttles. He feels the peculiar sink that lives over Berlin's rooftops. Flaps grip air. Gear thumps down. He thinks about the boy who said not to give up. For a heartbeat, he considers killing the plan. Then he remembers the wrappers pressed to noses, eyes closing to taste with only the mind. He breathes once. He waggles the wings, a small, unmistakable sign in a world that forbids flourishes. The aircraft rocks left, right, then settles. In that instant, children at the fence stand taller. He cracks the side window. Wind claws into the cockpit, loud and cold. He slides the first tiny parachute into the slipstream and watches it vanish aft, a white speck drifting toward the rubble lots beyond the field. The second follows, then the third. There is no cheer in the cockpit, no time. Airspeed stays just over 100 knots. The runway threshold grows. He focuses forward, rides the sink, flares, and lands on schedule. On rollout, he steals a glance toward the approach, but the city keeps its secrets. He taxis in, parks, and becomes a cog again. Pallets, paperwork, a mug of coffee he doesn't taste. Out beyond the buildings, the parachutes find their marks. A child breaks into a dog trot and stops short, waiting for smaller legs to catch up. Fingers lift the string, then the prize. The first bite vanishes. The second is offered to a friend. Wrappers travel farther than the candy, pressed to faces, eyes closed. There is laughter that doesn't carry to the ramp. Back at operations, rumor outruns any memo. Someone heard he rocked his wings. Someone says kids chased something white. He says nothing. Counts minutes, checks weather, stills his hands. The machine allows one story, written in tonnage, but stories leak. If a kindness can slip through a corridor timed to the second, what else might pass? Does command swat this down as a lapse, or see its utility and make space for it? The letters arrive like homing pigeons, smudged with coal and hope, addressed to Uncle Wackelflugel, and sometimes simply to the pilot who wiggles. They pile on a battered desk at Tempelhof operations. Neat German script on cheap envelopes, sketches of parachutes and a plane with smiling eyes. One reads, "Drop near the garden with the crooked gate." Another signs only Mercedes. Word travels faster than a rumor in a ration line. Within days, the story has a spine. Children who refuse to beg now write coordinates in the language of landmarks: burned roof, white chickens, shattered bell tower, mapping their world for a man they have never met. Halverson answers in the only currency he controls: time and attention. He keeps his drops small, his signal constant, his mouth shut. A few bundles at the edge of the field. No disruption, no delays. Public Affairs notices the mail before command does. A base paper runs a short piece about a pilot who promised to wiggle. A wire story folds it into a column about the airlift. A radio announcer names him Uncle Wiggly Wings, and the nickname sticks. Airmen grin and needle him. Some shake their heads. The schedule doesn't care what people call him, but the city does, and so it turns out does the home front. Then the summons lands like a stone in his gut. Report to headquarters. He irons his uniform twice and walks in ready to be grounded. The reversal is quick and disorienting. The general does not scold. He asks for specifics. Where do you drop? How many? What is the effect on approach? Major General William H. Tunner has spent his life turning chaos into cues. He hears an unplanned act that feeds morale and, if controlled, will not threaten throughput. He nods once. Make it official. Operation Little Vittles is born not as a diversion, but as a rule set. Safety first. No drops over active pavement. No tempting crowds toward taxiways. No packages heavy enough to injure. No change to separation or approach speeds. Candy will go off the threshold in the rubble lots that border the field, where children already watch the glide path and where a stumble won't lead under a wheel. The wing waggle stays as a tell to prevent surges of people chasing any random plane. Scaling improvisation demands discipline. Crews set up a shoot table in a corner of operations, a coil of string and a heap of handkerchiefs donated by airmen and by Berliners who can spare one square of cloth. The knot they settle on is simple and repeatable. The chutes open even when tossed at a shallow angle into the slipstream. Bundles weigh ounces. Notes go in when there's time. Every bundle is checked twice, because the clock will not forgive retries. They integrate the drops into the conveyor the way a good carpenter hides a joint. On downwind, the pilot briefs the sequence. The co-pilot handles the toss, the engineer monitors airspeed, and no one forgets why they are here. The drop point slides into the approach like another line item. Gear down, flaps, wiggle, shoot 1, shoot 2, shoot 3, eyes front. If the weather is ugly or the interval tightens, the candy stays in the bag. The machine is not a suggestion. Newsreels start to treat it as a story with a face. Footage shows white squares blooming under a gray sky, children sprinting, then stopping to share. Back in the States, school teachers read the clippings aloud. The letters that once arrived in ones and twos now come bundled, tied with twine, full of first names and crayon drawings, and a few coins taped inside to fund more candy. Civic clubs adopt squadrons. Confectioners quietly add cases to shipments headed east. Abundance, throttled for months, suddenly finds a lane. Boxes of chocolate and gum land at Rhine Mine in numbers that surprise even logistics officers. The crew room becomes a shoot factory. Off-duty hands cut cloth, coil string, and box finished bundles by the hundreds. A sergeant jokes that they are running 2 airlifts now, one for coal and one for smiles. He is not wrong. The scale is small by weight, but not by effect. Tunner's field commanders track the experiment like any other variable. What is the impact on taxi times? None. Any crowding near the perimeter? Minimal. And the police push back from danger areas. Any near misses? None reported. The operation grows cautiously. Additional crews adopt the wiggle and the drop without drama, briefed by senior pilots to treat it as a privilege that can be withdrawn. Doctrine and improvisation stand shoulder to shoulder, each respecting the other's limits. Halverson keeps flying his regular runs, but his mail doubles. Mercedes writes again, apologizing for the chickens she fears the packages might startle. He laughs and adds a note in reply. Some letters include maps drawn with a child's clarity. Here is the street, here is the tree that still has leaves, here is where the wind pushes. He marks probable spots with a grease pencil on approach plates that are otherwise pure instrument logic. There is a moment, a small internal hook, when the abundance threatens to overflow the lane. A shipment arrives so large that it blocks a corner of the hangar. For a beat, someone suggests a special flight. Tunner's rule kills the idea before it breathes. There will be no candy sorties that steal fuel or slots from coal. The success of a kindness is measured by how invisible it is to the schedule. The crew leaders nod and keep the bundles within the rhythm already set. On the ground, the sharing ritual deepens. Witnesses describe children helping the smallest reach a landed chute, dividing pieces evenly, saving wrappers for the scent. There is no mobbing of the fence, no stampede across the field. Berliners protect the boundary because they understand it sustains them. Scarcity has taught them how to husband abundance without losing face. Soft power respects that discipline and in turn gains power. Stateside, the name Little Vittles gives a shape to generosity. A school in Iowa fills a barrel with candy and handkerchiefs stitched by parents who remember their own rations. A church in Boston posts a chart with tally marks every time a bundle is completed. Children write to children, and their words ride east with the sweets. The notes are often simple. We won't give up on you either. The airlift carries more than cargo now. It carries conversation. The system learns small efficiencies. Smaller chutes drift less in crosswind. Lighter bundles are safer and spread farther. Pilots refine the release point to keep the pattern predictable. No one gets romantic about it. They treat kindness like a checklist item, and that respect keeps it alive. Numbers on the board tick upward. Tons of coal and flour climb past records that once seemed fantasy. Nobody in operations ever substitutes candy for cargo on a manifest. The paradox holds. A rigid schedule makes room for grace. What began as a private promise becomes a sanctioned ritual that costs almost nothing and returns something heavy enough to change the balance of stories. The children wait for the wing waggle, then look down to hunt white squares and gray streets. Crews keep landing on the 3-minute beat. Command measures risk, finds it acceptable, and quietly defends the space it has carved for morale. At the fence, the line holds steady. The wire hums when engines pass. A handkerchief parachute flutters into a courtyard and disappears under small hands. Above, another transport settles onto concrete, right on time. In the queue behind it, more pilots run their checklists and glance once at the city's edge. They have learned that a system built to feed bodies can also feed resolve, and they are not the only ones paying attention. Her handwriting is careful, the lines tight, as if paper itself is a ration. Lieber Onkel Wackelflügel, it begins, and the salutation feels older than the girl who writes it. She draws a tiny parachute in the margin, 4 strings pulled to a square, and then maps a neighborhood of rubble and one stubborn tree. Bitte, gib nicht auf, she writes. Please don't give up on us. Another letter carries a name that will stick to the story. Ich heiße Mercedes, the girl explains. Bitte nicht in den Hof. Die weißen Hühner sind schneller als ich. Wirf es in den Garten. I am Mercedes. Please, not in the yard. The white chickens are faster than me. Throw it in the garden. She adds a promise. Ich werde niemandem sagen. The letters were real, and they multiplied. They reached operations with stamps smudged by coal and rain, addressed to the pilot who wiggles, to the airfield, to a feeling. Halverson answered with a wingtip and cloth squares, and each answer landed in a city learning again how to be generous. The correspondence turned a nameless crowd into individual voices, each marking a spot on the ground and a place in the mind. Now shift the view west, to an RAF transport on a gray morning over the plains. A pilot checks his watch and says nothing because there is nothing to add to a schedule that has already spoken. Call it Operation Plain Fare. The Dakotas are faithful, the Avro Yorks stubborn, and by winter the Handley Page Hastings carries bigger loads into the same narrow lanes. Their destination is Gateau, where the tower speaks with clipped calm, and the runway sits like a pencil laid across the city. He is light on fuel, heavy on discipline. The route from Wunstorf threads the northern corridor. The outbound traffic will go home through the middle lane. There is no orbit over Berlin, there is only the talk-down. He remembers icing over the Harz, a child's wave near Spandau, then the concrete and the brakes. Plain fare ran beside Vittles like twin rails. British engineers resurfaced Gateau and moved mountains of coal. They hated waste, avoided drama, and watched the American candy drops with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. Some RAF crews tucked sweets into the routine on their own terms, but the British pride was in tonnage and smooth succession. The ledger favored their view. The blockade's arithmetic was ruthless and public. By early 1949, the Airlift, taken as a whole, was delivering record tonnage day after day. On the Easter Parade, a planned demonstration of capacity in April, combined deliveries reached about 12,940 tons in 24 hours, a figure that read like a dare. Set next to that, Little Vittles looked trivial by weight and serious by effect. Roughly 23 tons of candy, sent down on about 250,000 parachutes, could not heat a flat or turn a mill. But it did something numbers struggled to capture. Photographs of children chasing white squares turned up on front pages from Chicago to Copenhagen. The story put faces on a siege and dissolved the distance between a crate of coal and a kitchen in the dark. The Kremlin did not ignore it. In East papers and radio commentaries, the tone hardened. A TOS item in late 1948 dismissed the Schokoladenbomber as a publicity stunt, evidence of capitalist cynicism and a clumsy attempt to buy loyalty with sweets. Cartoons showed greedy children scrambling while American officers smirked. The insinuation clear: the West starved Berlin and then tossed candy for a photograph. Myth met reality in the gap between what the candy was and what it stood for. The reality was simple: discipline in the corridors, tonnage at the ramps, nights of fog and ice. The myth, as rivals framed it, said the West was sentimental and unserious, that it threw chocolate instead of solving problems. The counter-myth, carried by the letters and images, said the West could be both disciplined and humane. Here is the reversal worth pausing over. The Airlift's strength came from anonymity, the interchangeability of crews and aircraft, the clockwork, yet the public needed a face. The parachute gave them one that did not distort the machine. No slot was sacrificed, no pallet of coal left behind, and the photographs made the case that the rhythm was protecting lives worth protecting. Berliners grasped that nuance. Parents held children back from the fence because they understood perimeter rules. Policemen shepherded crowds away from taxiways. Neighbors shared, as if manners were part of civil defense. The sharing ritual, wrappers first for scent, bites divided to the smallest hands, taught dignity in scarcity and gratitude in brief abundance. That dignity blunted the blockade's psychological aim to make West Berlin appear desperate, disordered, and alone. Abroad, the effect ran through editorials and living rooms. Commentators contrasted the regularity of the airlift with the capriciousness of the blockade, and the candy became shorthand for a moral stance. Power constrained by rules, kindness constrained by safety. Opinion moved, and officials who counted votes and budgets found it easier to defend a long commitment. The RAF pilot, looking back, might say it this way: the pictures helped buy us time. He would point to the tally board and the weather maps and say the siege lifted because the math turned against it. He would also allow that a child waving from a garden made the math feel righteous. And that matters when a nation decides whether to keep flying in sleet. In the East, editors kept printing the sneers, but the images traveled farther than the accusations. A city that was supposed to crumble learned to wait for wings and to treat each arrival as both normal and meaningful. As winter bled into spring, record days piled up, and the blockade's premise that pressure would break will looked brittle. In the end, numbers would settle the argument, but they would never be the whole of it. Two curves rose together, one charting daily tons, the other charting public trust. Somewhere in their overlap, a small parachute drifting over a gray street did real work. The next questions were predictable. Who kept the records? Who saved the letters? And how sure can we be about what we think we saw? And someone was counting every piece. Receipts matter in a story that sits between sentiment and strategy. We are anchoring every detail to paper, film, and flight logs, and we will show our homework on screen. Primary evidence includes Gail S. Halverson's papers and 16mm footage, held at BYU Special Collections and the National Museum of the USAF, along with Operation Little Vittles correspondence preserved in unit files and family archives. We will display scans of letters, provenance stamps visible, and read German originals aloud with faithful subtitles. Numbers and procedures come from official histories and tables. We will cite USAF and RAF reports that log daily tonnage, aircraft types, accident data, and ground times, and we will flag any range when sources disagree. For contemporaneous public reactions, we draw on Stars and Stripes, Associated Press dispatches, British Pathé newsreels, Der Tagesspiegel, and The Times. Allied Control Authority documents and Air Ministry maps confirm the 3 20-mile corridors and the inbound and outbound practice. 3 books provide synthesis and cross-checks. Andrei Cherny's The Candy Bombers, Roger G. Miller's To Save a City, and Anne and John Toose's The Berlin Airlift. Where their narratives diverge on dates or emphasis, we will note the variants on screen and lean on primary material. Oral histories from Halverson and fellow crews, recorded by the USAF and museums, supply texture, and we will identify them by collection and date. Claim by claim, our captions will carry the receipts. For the first drop, we will state mid-July 1948, with a footnote that Halverson later dated it to 18 July, while some press accounts reported the 17th. Aircraft type will be labeled C-54 Skymaster for Halverson's drops, with a note that early airlift sorties used C-47s. Tunner's authorization is documented in correspondence and public affairs releases that formalized Operation Little Vittles later in 1948. The Easter parade total will appear as about 12,940 tons in 24 hours, sourced to combined USAF-RAF tallies. For Little Vittles, we will present totals as approximately 23 tons of candy on roughly 250,000 parachutes, noting the counting method and the possibility of double reporting across units. When we display corridor diagrams, we will reference Allied archives, mark them not to scale, and indicate the one-way practice that governed traffic. Any recreation will be labeled, and aircraft markings will match period photographs. Tail codes and squadron badges will not be invented. Accuracy notes will live where viewers expect them. We will say plainly that Candy did not physically break the blockade. Sustained logistics, procedure reforms, and political patience did. Black Friday, 13 August 1948, will be flagged as the inflection point that drove Tunner's reforms. No stacking over Berlin, fixed intervals, standardized loads, and a ruthless missed approach policy. And we will show how those changes protected both the Airlift and Little Vittles. Credit will be proportional. RAF Planefare, USAF Vittles, and French efforts at Tegel will be named on equal footing, with tonnage shares and milestones indicated by source. We will avoid brand placement. No confectioner's logo appears unless it is visible in a documented photo or donation letter, where a brand is commonly assumed but not proven in our sources. We will keep the caption generic. We will also be cautious with quotes and memories. Lines attributed to children will come from extant letters, not from embellished retellings, and translations will preserve grammar and tone. Where a scene is reconstructed from multiple accounts, we will say so. Where a statistic varies by edition or archive, we will show the range and list the repository. Finally, we will open a channel for scrutiny. A pinned comment will invite corrections and additions with citation archive ID, page, or reel. The description will carry a full bibliography and links to digitized documents when rights allow. If we correct an error, we will timestamp the change. With the trail established, we follow outcomes in the record, tonnage rising, procedures hardening, and small mercies enduring beyond the blockade. Aftermath, legacy, reflection plus CTA. What actually broke the siege and why the candy still matters. No banners unfurl when a siege ends. Engines just keep turning. On 12 May 1949, train whistles return to the city. Barricades lift from roads, and the timetables in West Berlin do not flinch. The runway at Tempelhof keeps breathing every 3 minutes because the airlift has proved a point the blockade cannot answer. It will outlast pressure, outfly winter, and outplan obstruction. The lifting was political, but the cause was practical. Through months of fog, ice, and reform, the system built by Tunner and executed by USAF, RAF, and French crews had driven daily tonnage to records that made the blockade look futile. Stocks grew, outages shrank, and the message was simple: keep the gates closed and the city still eats. When the Soviets reopened routes, the airlift did not stop. It ran into the autumn to build reserves of coal and food, a hedge against a second squeeze, and a grace note to a city that had learned to count salvation by the minute. Little Vittles tapered as the skies normalized. Crews rotated home. Halverson finished his tour. Others kept the ritual alive until the last parcels fluttered into courtyards with more laughter than urgency. By then, the candy drops had become a civic ceremony. Teachers walked children to safe viewing spots. Police stood back and nodded. A pilot's unauthorized kindness had been absorbed into the airlift's culture without ever displacing a single pallet. The memory outlived the flights. Years later, letter writers stepped forward as adults with families of their own, bringing brittle envelopes and stories of the first taste of chocolate after years of substitutes. A woman who once warned about swift chickens thanked the man who learned her map and threw to her garden. Halverson returned for anniversaries, lugging the same 16mm camera and a bag of candy, and he repeated the trick on other humanitarian runs around the world. He understood that the parachute was a symbol, and symbols, when handled carefully, keep faith between strangers. What actually broke the siege was logistics married to discipline. The reforms after Black Friday, no stacks over Berlin, fixed intervals, standard loads, missed approach equals diversion, hardened the machine until it could carry more than hope across narrow corridors. The math won the contest, yet The math needed a story to carry it, because democracies fund long fights with consent, not decree. Little Vittles lent the airlift a human face without stealing a single slot, and that face turned outwards, persuading taxpayers, editors, and allies that this grind was worth the grind. The contrasts resolve, not by one side vanquishing the other, but by coexistence. Doctrine stayed in charge. Improvisation asked permission and was given a lane. Scarcity stayed real. Brief abundance taught sharing and dignity. Myth softened reality's edges without replacing it. The chocolate airlift never moved coal, but it moved morale, and morale moved votes, which moved fuel, crews, and patience. In that chain, a handkerchief chute mattered because it never pretended to be more than it was. Look at the ledger. Over 2 million tons cross the sky by the time the airlift stands down. Little Vittles accounts for roughly 23 tons on about 250,000 tiny parachutes. Measured in calories burned, it is a rounding error. Measured in images and letters saved in family drawers, it is heavy. The city that expected starvation kept its manners, and the crews who expected only routine found a ritual that made the routine bearable. Stand again at the fence. Coal dust still smudges brick, but the wires hum with fewer worries. A child holds up a square of cloth like a flag from a country that did not exist until someone decided rules could make room for kindness. This is the strategic payoff. Soft power works when it is harnessed to hard schedules, when compassion does not compete with duty, but rides along at the edge of the glide path. The lesson travels. In later crises, from airlifts to earthquake relief, commanders copy Tunner's insistence on procedure and tolerate small acts of mercy that do not touch throughput. Veterans of Berlin carried that ethic forward. Checklists first, humanity always. In that order, because that order protects both. The city carried it forward too, building a culture of remembrance that honors pallets and parachutes with the same quiet gratitude. If you want to see the hinge that made all of this possible, follow us into the day the airlift nearly tripped over its own success and learned to fly like a machine. Black Friday over Berlin is where doctrine beat chaos and gave a wing waggle room to breathe. Join us there to watch procedures tighten, tempers flare, and a system become unbreakable. It's the missing context that explains how kindness survived inside the strictest timetable of the post-war sky.